Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Listeners, Midlife Matters is 4 years old, and we're here to celebrate with a fun walk down memory lane. Join us as we share how we've grown and changed, what we've learned, and what we hope for the future. Let's get started. Listeners, today is our 4-year anniversary. Midlife Matters podcast is now 4 years old. Can you believe it, Julie and Mindy?
I can't.
Man, like we're potty trained, we're up and we're walking, we're having conversations. I mean, who thought we would have ever been here?
We made it to preschool.
Right.
So listeners, some of you have been with us from the very beginning. Whenever I tell someone I have a podcast and they're like, oh, I'm going to try listening, I always want to say, well, don't start at the beginning, because we really didn't get our footing for a while. And if you just start at the beginning, you're like, who are these hacks? But I think that we have improved. And I don't think that that's bragging. I just think that we have improved over 4 years.
Yeah. And, like when you watch a television show, the pilot is always the worst episode. It's consistently the worst episode. So I think, we're in good company. So
Yes. So if you are sharing our episodes or our podcast with your friends, say, maybe don't start at the beginning.
Right.
Work your way back once you've already discovered that you like them.
Right.
I actually don't know if they sound bad. I'm just too afraid to go listen. You know what I mean?
They sound kind of bad to me, but I don't know. What do you think, Mindy?
Yeah, me too. And because we didn't really have our rhythm with our conversation. Like we were all really nervous. I remember I used to type out every word. And then I was like, do I read it? Do I say it? I mean, I really didn't know how to handle it when it was my turn, essentially. And we like the prep that we used to put into episodes. I don't know. I think this is actually a maturing thing, not a laziness thing. But I think prep work that we used to do was over and above. We spent so many more hours. Yes. And now we're like, here's a question. You want to talk about that? Sure. And we can talk about it.
Right.
I know the night before we're like, now what are we talking about tomorrow?
Yes.
That wouldn't have happened 4 years ago.
No, not at all. No. We were so nervous.
Yeah. So it's kind of like when you go back and look at your middle school pictures, they're super cringeworthy. If you listen to our first few episodes, they're super cringeworthy, but I hate to take them down. I don't know. Don't judge us, listeners.
That's right. I'm sure there's good content back there.
Yes. But not only have we improved as far as like putting out an episode, and I feel like we've improved in our conversational ability, but I feel like we've just improved in our topics. Like I think our topics were very basic at the beginning, and now I feel like we've talked about a lot of real things that really span even more than midlife, like really could be applicable in a lot of different ways to any age group. And so, maybe at some point our name even needs to grow up, but I still like our name, but just that we're not only for midlife.
Right.
Yeah, because we've talked about friendship, prayer, all kinds of things that, depression. I mean, things that
meal planning
across the board.
Yeah.
And even I love that we've been going long enough to delve into, we have a lot of episodes that probably under the topic, it's maybe the same kind of topic, but we've delved into different nuances of a topic. So I really like that part of it, is that we have had time to focus on different aspects of kind of maybe similar subjects,
Yeah.
Or the same subject at a different phase of life. Like we're still in the same midlife season, but our lives have changed, and our homes have changed and things like that. So it's always kind of a fresh approach.
Yeah.
Great
old topic.
Yeah, because we've talked about forgiveness. We've talked about loving people well. We've talked about friendship. We've delved into friendship in midlife. I mean, like even just under that, and the loving people well, we just talked about boundaries. I mean, it's just like all these different aspects of these life things that we deal with all the time.
Yeah. Well, listeners, today we're going to take you down a little walk on memory lane. We're going to kind of look at where we were 4 years ago, where we were now, how we've grown personally, maybe some different projects we've tackled in our lives. So You can just sit back. You may know some of this. If this is your first episode, it'll be new to you, but hey, you'll see how we've grown in 4 years. But the first thing we want to talk about, the first thing we want to talk about is where we were when we started. And we want to describe maybe our family, maybe us personally. We can give our ages of where we were 4 years ago if we want to say it out loud. So I'll go first. Like, where I was 4 years ago, I was 46. You guys, I would love to be 46 again. Like,
wow.
I just really loved listening to podcasts. And whenever I love doing something, then that makes me want to try it too. So 4 years ago, I thought I really would love to see if I could have a podcast. It sounds so fun. My favorite kinds of podcasts were the ones where people are just talking about regular things. So I said to Julie, don't crush my dreams. Come along for the ride.
I'll never forget that walk.
Yes. And I said to Mindy, we've always had great conversations. Would you be willing to join us? And Mindy actually had never even listened to a podcast. Is that right, Mindy?
That's true. I was like, I don't even know how to listen. Like, can you tell me? Like, I need to educate myself.
Which I really am surprised that all three of us got on board with this project at the same time, and that we've all held each other up at different points over the 4 years, you know, where some of us would have been willing to let it go, not out of like anger or spite, but just like, you know, maybe are we tired of doing this? But there's always two of us that are like, come on.
Yeah.
You did do a lot of begging there at the beginning, though, Marie. Well, I mean, I don't want to skip over that because I mean, like, my first answer was, no way.
I don't mind
Julie
doing some convincing.
Have felt the same way.
Yeah, I was like, are you
We had several phone calls.
I don't speak in public.
Right.
My go-to to get people on board is always like, well, you won't have to do anything but this.
You did say that.
That's how I get a lot of people on board with things. Is,
listen, that speaks my language.
Will only be this.
Oh, got it.
But you guys have grown in your roles over the years too, though. I feel like now Mindy's become coming up with topics left and right. Where at the beginning she was like, "Just tell me what the topic is."
I know. I didn't have the brain space.
We've all grown. But anyways, I wanted to start this podcast with the intention of exploring midlife motherhood, which I was in the thick of at the time, and what it means to be in the empty nest. And there were a lot of podcasts about young motherhood, but I couldn't find very many that had women in my stage of life. Just that need to talk about this with other women made me want to also start a podcast. And I feel like that's what we've done. Now, I don't know that we've solved any of the problems or that I dreaded my empty nest any less, but I do think it's been cathartic all these years. What do you guys think?
Yeah. And I thought, even if we weren't doing this podcast, I would miss this hour every week because it is a very intentional time of talking about things that are meaningful and important and what's going on in our lives. And it's always encouraging. And so I would miss it from that aspect. If and when it ends. So
we walked through so many seasons together, and at first it was difficult to put into my life, and now I can't imagine my life without it. The conversations with you both, and it's so amazing how a certain topic will prepare me for something that's happening in my life, and how it kind of helps me think about things that I wouldn't have typically sat and thought about, prepared for some, the books we've read and things like that. So just all in all, I just can't imagine it now not being a part of my week.
And Mindy, you asked like what our life looked like at the time. And just to recap for listeners, so I had two freshmen. I think they were freshmen. They're twins. A sophomore. All three of them were in high school. I had one in college and one that was married. So that was kind of where I was at that time. Mindy, you want to talk about where you were 4 years ago?
Gosh, 4 years ago, I was not over the hill yet. You guys, I was 39 years old.
I know.
When we started. I feel like that was so young. Like I was such a baby, but I was a total mess when we started, which is my main reason for not wanting to do it because I had a child in elementary school, middle school, high school, and we had just dropped off our oldest at college.
Mm-hmm.
And 1 week after we dropped Abby off at college, we moved states away from her and moved up north for the first time. And I was recording in about a 1,300 square foot townhome, having just moved out of a 7,000 square foot home.
Mm-hmm.
And the life change, 40 was coming. We were separated. Like, it was like first kid to college, moving. I mean, all of it. We were a mess. I was a mess. And yet I had no idea what the next 4 years were going to be like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I felt like that was actually, I mean, looking back now, I'm so glad to not be there. To not be in that place, emotionally, that place.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they have those scales that are like stressors of life events. And you had like a lot of them, sending your first one off, moving. Bryce had just started a new job. Like there were a lot of those big life stressors going on at your time. And I just said, hey, you want to start a podcast? No wonder you were like, no, I don't think so.
It's like, you're crazy. What am I going to talk about?
All right, Julie, where were you 4 years ago when I said, don't crush my dreams?
Well, I thought I was in the empty nest through with hands-on parenting, but we still had one at home in college. But I thought, he doesn't really need me. He's kind of doing his own thing. But I didn't realize now that he has moved out, which was just last month. So I didn't realize like how much life and energy and purpose he still brought into our home. Like we were hosting the college group from our church every week in our home, and having bonfires and movie nights and things that he was bringing into our home. And I really enjoyed hosting all of that, and meeting his friends, and something that you don't always get to do with college kids. But since he attended college here, we got to be a part of that. So I realized that after he moved out, this is the empty nest. This is really the empty nest, when it's quiet and don't really have a reason to cook a big meal or try a new recipe all the time. And, so that's where I was 4 years ago. I didn't see this podcast coming. It's not anything I ever thought I would do, or I don't think I listened to many podcasts either. So yeah, it was, and that just reaffirms to me that you all don't always see good things coming. Like it can look kind of bleak on your horizon, and something can pop up you didn't even know about.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And be a good thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mindy came up with the questions for this episode. So she put highs you've walked through and lows. And I thought, you know what? I just feel like we've all, as a country, had a universal low. Like, I just don't think we can ignore that 2 years of these 4, really, going on 3 years of these 4 has been COVID. And so I laugh when I think about the episodes we did back in like April and May of 2020. And we would do them and we would say, is it going to be over by the time it even comes out? Like, should we even talk about this topic anymore? Is this even relevant? Or is this even going to, oh my goodness, we were so naive.
Right. I remember so many conversations where we said, I think this will be the last COVID related episode. Like we won't have to talk about this anymore. And we got to where we just hated that we had to keep talking about it, but we did.
Yeah.
And I think it served a good purpose for all of us.
It did. Right? Yeah. I mean, it's just so funny because they talk about sometimes like in the podcast world or any thing where you're putting out content, they talk about evergreen content. Like anyone could listen at any time and it would still be relevant. And I kept on feeling like, I don't even really want to mention the word COVID because that's going to date this content so badly. But COVID went on so long that you couldn't not talk about it.
Right. It's kind of unique that we podcasted through the whole thing. and that it really marked a time in our whole world. The whole world experienced that. And we'll always remember the COVID years.
Right. And I felt like as a podcast, we could have actually done more episodes about COVID. We didn't overdo. I almost wish we would have done more now so that we could go back and have our thoughts for posterity purposes, that we would be able to, someday, your grandchildren are probably going to come. They're probably going to have to write a paper at school and say did you live through COVID? Can you answer these 10 questions? Yeah. And I just think that those kind of episodes would serve kind of as that record of what it was like.
Right. How, you're right. How we navigated the grocery store.
Yeah.
Getting groceries. I mean, that was just a whole thing. And it was just such a bizarre, unique experience that we all went through together. Yeah. And separately.
Right.
Because
no, I know. So I feel like if I was going to think about lows during the last 4 years, I would probably just have to say things, pretty much all of them had something to do with COVID. or stemmed from something that occurred because of COVID. So let's think about highs over the past 4 years. So a big high that happened in 2019, a year after the podcast started, was my son got married. So that was a fun family event. Another high during the last 4 years is the birth of our first granddaughter in March 2020. That's a thrilling experience, and that's been a bright light. And then I would have to say the third high, still in the last 4 years, is the birth of our second granddaughter in February of 2022. So I feel like those three family events have been big highs for the last 4 years.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. How about you guys?
Well, I'll start with the highs. And I definitely consider this podcast a high for me in ways that I never imagined. And I don't think I understood the possible connection with an audience like that. People we never see, we never talk in front of. And the fact that, the fact that I don't sit in front of an audience is actually what enables me to do this. But I found that it gave me a voice that I didn't have before. And it's a way to share what's on my mind and what's important, and offers some encouragement to people who we've learned through feedback that are obviously thinking the similar things that we're thinking about life, and that people just want to feel like they're not alone. And I hope that we have done a good job of that. And we just have some really nice fans that give great feedback, and they communicate with us their appreciation, their support, their love. And that's just something I never expected. We got a lot of that initially from our family, and you're like, they're family. But when you start hearing it from people you don't know that might live in another country or another state, that's just very fulfilling and rewarding. And I just am really grateful for that. That was definitely a high. Well, that started, pretty soon after we started. But then in 2019, we also had a new grandbaby born into our family. Our daughter and son-in-law gave our family Ezra, and becoming a grandmother was definitely a high point. It is just such a unique experience like no other. It's hard to explain. And we just celebrated with him in September, turning 3. I can't believe that he's that big now. My daughter just sent me a picture of him riding a big horse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She said, I was so proud of him. He was up there by himself. So those are the two highs that stuck out in my mind. I hope I'm not forgetting anything that I should say.
Right. It's like an acceptance speech. Let me forget not to think. I don't want to forget to thank you.
Right. There were other things.
Yeah.
Well, I guess maybe my son graduating from college, just marking the end of that, for our family. No more children in school.
That was a high because your checkbook finally got a little break.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And it's just really good to see him totally embracing living on his own and thriving and budgeting and managing his life, So that's still a high. I would say I was going to talk about the pandemic as well, just how it's just interesting to have the perspective we have now that none of us saw it coming. How you can just be rocking along, starting a podcast, and then out of nowhere, your life can change so quickly. And then I had to face that again in 2021. And that's kind of the lowest low for me and our family. And I'm referring to John's cancer. And I'm not going to dwell there. I just felt like I had to acknowledge that. But I just want to say that John's cancer has been a transformative process for both of us. And I'm not the same person I was, and I'm glad. And I just want to encourage any listeners that might be going through really painful, difficult things like this. It could be a different reason, a different cause, but pain is pain. And I just want to say that growth is possible through pain. And if I could encourage you in any way by, through conversation or prayer with you or prayer for you, I would love to do that, as many of you have done for me. It's really meant a lot to our family to know that people are praying.
Yeah. I would say that John's cancer diagnosis was a sobering low point, like in the lives of your friends and in the lives of our listeners. It was just a sobering low point. And listeners, if you just want to see how that growth, I think that going back, when did we record that, Julie? I don't have it, but early February of 2021, and you talked about hearing about John's diagnosis.
The episode is called Life Updates, I think.
Okay, and it's in.
I thought it was
early.
hard things.
Oh yeah, the hard
life.
parts of life.
Oh, that could be it too.
Yeah,
life.
I think it's called The Hard Parts of Life. Yes, and if you want to hear, it's amazing to me that we're coming up on 2 years of John's diagnosis, and to see how you've grown over the last 2 years, and to see John, what he's been through, and just your family. And I think that we can all learn something, and we can also rejoice with how God has carried you and been faithful. And really at that time, nobody knew anything,
Yeah, it's really been a miraculous journey. I hold the possibility of healing, but even without healing on this earth, there's still been so many miracles just in his care and his progress and his attitude and relationships. And it's just too many to name, how God has worked. And so we're just still living expectantly, not knowing, what's to come, but hopeful.
Yeah. And I think John's diagnosis has also maybe changed the topics that we've even talked about or considered talking about. I think maybe that's, we've talked about deeper and harder topics because you're going through such a deep and hard thing.
When we first learned, I just thought that was at a time where I really didn't want to give up the podcast. And I thought, but how can I do that? How can I don't want to be fake. I can't come on here and laugh. I thought it would be wrong if I ever laughed or had fun or was lighthearted. And so I think that's why I had to share it, instead of just keeping it, because I just felt like it would come out, it would come through. And so I just wanted to be transparent with that. And it has been good to know that you still laugh. You still, you do still laugh through very terrible things. And I hope people have seen that.
Yeah, I think
they've realized that.
Yeah. All right, Mindy, tell us what your highs and lows were over the past 4 years. You kind of hinted at them a little bit earlier.
Oh, yeah, I did. Well, when I started thinking back, I realized I started kind of with COVID. Also, that it really was a catalyst for our family in ways that we had no idea it would affect us, because we had just made that big life transition, to Pennsylvania, and the high hopes for this new job and all of this stuff, and we were making the most of it and traveling to new places and really delving in, and bam, COVID hit. And so we ended up moving twice while we were in Pennsylvania, because we started out in a rental until our home in Tennessee sold. And then we bought a home in Pennsylvania, probably the most beautiful home I will ever own. And then COVID hit right after we bought the house. so then we experienced job loss, as so many other people did during that time, as companies and businesses started losing money because everything just shut down. Mm-hmm. And so that was a byproduct of COVID. And so then we moved to Farragut, Tennessee, really to kind of recover and look for another job. And so we walked through each of those years too. You know, your kids are still growing. You're doing schooling at home, and we had so many different ages that we didn't have enough laptops. I mean, we didn't have enough Wi-Fi for everybody to try to do that, you know, and like even Abby came home from school and she had just started dating now her husband. So they had just started dating right before. And so it's just like life, you know, it was like one of those things by itself would have been enough. I remember thinking, I don't understand why we have to walk through so many transitions all at the same time. And it seemed to be that way for 4 years straight. There was always multiple things we were trying to tackle simultaneously. So through that, there were highs. And so there's different types of suffering and different types of trauma. And so our level of suffering isn't to the level of Julie and John. But we did have suffering. Each of those moves was traumatic in its own way. Each of those, the job loss was traumatic. The loss of identity, the loss of, you know, what does our family look like? How are we going to function? Where are we going to live? All at the same time, then our daughter gets engaged. So then, we have a wedding in there. And so those are highlights. You know, it's like while you're living through the dailiness of trying to figure out your life and things aren't maybe going so well, you have these major things you're celebrating. And so I feel like through the last 4 years, gosh, we kind of went through it as a family. Through that, we have gained a son-in-law whom we adore and absolutely love. And we now live in a place that we love, and we now have a home that we love. But I mean, it just took a lot to get here. So
yeah,
there's just a lot of transition in there. And similar to Julie, I would say we are not the same people that we were 4 years ago. And I remember there are certain seasons where I just was tired of the daily, and I didn't know that I wanted to continue with the podcast because I was kind of tired of talking about certain things. And and it was hard, and it's hard to put yourself out there. It's hard when you're not feeling encouraged to try to be an encouragement or to look at the bright side, because you don't always you don't feel that all the time. And they're just seasons that are dark, and there's seasons that are hard, and there's seasons that are just difficult. And so I can't believe we're here.
You did have a lot going on, and I don't diminish your suffering, because it's a lot. And I think we all think, gosh, if I just had this to deal with, I could deal with it, but not with this and this and this, you know. Just adds to the uncertainty.
Right.
Well, where have we been in the last 4 years? Well, again, when I saw this question, it's like, well, where have we been? We've all been less places than we thought we may have been at the beginning of 4 years, because for 2 years, we didn't get to go very many places. At least, like I'm thinking like I've been to the beach like a lot in the last 4 years, because it seemed like even during COVID, that was like the vacation you could count on. It wasn't going to get canceled at the last minute. There wasn't going to be some COVID rule that popped up that now you couldn't go. Like, it seems like I've been to the beach a lot in the last 4 years, more than I've probably been to the beach in my whole life before that. For different reasons and different beaches, but still, it seemed like the beach was always the safe pick. Well, we know that won't get canceled, but
Thank you, Florida.
Yeah. But one fun trip that we did do was our Glacier National Park trip this summer, and we did talk about that. And I think that was so wonderful to me too, because it finally was, after a couple of years of not seeing new things other than the beach, to see something new in a new area really did revive me. Like it really did something that I didn't even know I was missing. And so I know, Julie, you love to travel, and maybe that's one of the reasons you love it, because it does something to you that you didn't even know you'd been missing. And I think that trip was great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful place to be revived.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But where are some of the places that you guys have been in the last 4 years?
I had a lot of fun with this question because I went back to 2018, 2019. And I think back to how much traveling we did. And now I kind of see how blessed we were. Like that wasn't coincidental. That's the summer we took all of our family, all 7 of us, on a 2-week trip to the UK. We went to England and Scotland. It was the trip of a lifetime. And now I'm so thankful that we did it when we did it. That was the year I drove with my friend and her camper all the way from Seattle back across the country. And we just hit any national park we wanted to go to. Like it was just every morning we got up and like, well, where are we going to go today? And I just remember feeling this awesome sense of freedom. Like I remember thinking how free I was after parenting for so long, after homeschooling for so long. I don't know. It was just this unbelievable feeling. I think I kind of went nuts actually, because that year, John and I went to Oxford, England with another couple. I went to Santa Barbara with my daughter, starting our first annual mother-daughter trip. The next year, John and I, with our son, went to Denmark and Switzerland. We went back to England with another couple at Christmas. I went to London with a friend, and
wow, you really did a lot of traveling.
Her daughter was traveling abroad, and she was going to be over there. I think her husband was flying back, and she goes, "Oh, I'll be by myself, and my daughter's kind of busy. She's in school. Wouldn't it just be cool if you could come over?" And I think she was just like dreaming, like, wouldn't that be so cool? And I looked at John and said, I think I can. Like, what is tying me down here? I mean, other than that I am married,
Right.
But, John was like, go, do it. And so I just am so thankful because, then the pandemic came and then John's illness. And I'm just so thankful we have those memories. I mean, I traveled probably more in those 2 years than I have ever traveled. So, and then, even in 2021, when John was sick, we've been to New England twice, we've been to Texas twice, and we drove to Mackinac Island. So, we've slowed down quite a bit as far as international travel, but we still try to do what we can.
Yeah, Julie, I think I remember that you were planning a trip to London for a group of women. And I remember being interested, and that was right when COVID then kind of crushed those plans.
Yeah, I had 3 or 4 people on board, and I remember a lady at church goes, "Well, what about this COVID thing?" We were out to lunch one Sunday after church, and I said, "This was March, and the trip wasn't until October." And I said, "That is so far away." I said, "It is not going to interfere with an October trip."
Right. Yep. I remember.
I just remember thinking, what is she so concerned about?
Worry wart.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that didn't get to come, but maybe in the future it will.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and Julie, like you said, like at different times in your life, you can travel. Like when you suggested that friend trip in October of 2020, I was still having high schoolers. Like it just wasn't a time where I felt like I could leave, easily. My husband travels. They would have been home alone. But now if you planned a trip like that, I feel like I'm finally at a stage where I could do something like that. So it's just funny, like if you're listening and you're saying, well, how would I ever do all that? There will come a time where you'll feel more free.
Yeah, that freedom hits you and you're like, wow, I can really just go where I want to go.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. Seriously, like you two are empty nesters now with grandchildren. And I feel so separated from you guys in such a way. Like our seasons are so different now. Like our lives are so different now. And I felt like, like we all could kind of relate. Like we talked about teenagers before, 4 years ago. We talked about, raising boys and raising girls and all this stuff. And I'm like, I am by myself now. I still have kids to raise and I'm ready to go off to London.
I did think about that, Mindy, how things have changed is we used to talk about teenagers a lot more and we don't anymore.
Yes, I know. I still have teenagers. Like I can't be done yet, you guys.
I could still talk about my teenagers, but I'm not that far removed that I don't remember.
Right. And I'm ready to be a grandma, but I mean, I'm still years away, so fine, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I know you've been places, so where have you been, Mindy?
Yes. Well, it's so ironic, but similar to Julie, before COVID hit, I felt like we did a lot of traveling and we were very excited. Like I said, we were very optimistic when we first moved to Pennsylvania and we lived it up until COVID hit. So we went to New York City several times, multiple places in New Jersey, the Jersey Shore. I found how completely gorgeous it is. Washington, D.C. was a favorite. We had plans to go back there to see the cherry blossoms in April of 2020, which of course got canceled. We went, the Amish country, the history that's available in the Northeast is truly incredible. The museums that we went to, Baltimore, Maryland, we went skiing in Vermont, actually in 2020, January that year, I was on a cruise to the Bahamas. February of 2020, we were in Vermont skiing, and then March hit.
And you were home with everybody.
And everybody came home. I was like, whoa. So since then, other than moving every year, like I mentioned, which we've lived in 3 states through the past 4 years, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Georgia. Since COVID, beach many times, similar to you, Marie. The beach was always welcoming. Visiting family in Missouri and Kansas. And then Bryce and I got to do kind of a trip that we had dreamed about for a while for our 25th anniversary. We went to Phoenix, Sedona, and the Grand Canyon in Arizona. And also similar to you, Marie, it was just so amazing to see something so beautiful in such a different way. I have seen the beach my whole life. I've never been out west. So that just scratched the surface of things that I want to see and experience now.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And you're going to get there, Mindy. I mean, you're already gaining a lot of freedom. So
yes.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about things that we've learned over the last 4 years. And this can be very broad because, of course, we're all learning. But what are some of the things that have come to your mind that you have learned, some ways that you've changed? Like we've talked about maybe how we're different. And I was thinking about things that I've learned over the last 4 years. I think it was right around, I don't know, maybe before COVID, but during COVID especially, I really discovered that I actually like working in my yard. And I never used to like working in my yard. We had my mom on and she talked about yard work and landscaping. I don't even remember when that episode was. And that kind of got me doing some projects. And that must have been in 2019 because then in 2020, it seemed like, okay, well, here's something that we can do. We're all home. I can plant some things. I can experiment in my yard. And I have really grown to enjoy that. I am one of those people now that says, do you notice the flowers I planted? Or did you notice that when you drove up? Or I really enjoy like looking at things I've planted as I drive in and out of my driveway, which that is just crazy.
Yes. I've noticed that in you, Marie.
You
that
have?
Is a big change. Yes. And your flower beds look great.
Thank you. That's been something I've learned. Another thing I learned by myself over the last 4 years is I love dogs. I never considered myself a person that loved dogs. But we got a dog in May of 2021, and loving a dog, my dog, has made me also love other people's dogs. in ways that I never would have thought. Like other people's dogs used to be annoying to me. Now I don't mind them, and I kind of, talk to them and have sympathy for them, or like, I don't know, I can relate better. Those are just two big areas where I thought I've really changed a lot in both of those areas.
You can give Charlie a second chance.
I think I have given Charlie a second chance. And now we're trying to convince Mindy to get a dog.
I still have teenagers, remember? You waited till yours were about to leave, Marie.
I know. That's true.
I have a couple of years to go.
Yeah. All right. Well, what things have you guys learned about yourself that you did not know 4 years ago?
Well, I don't know if I learned about myself. I'm just learning. This is how I've grown in the last 4 years. I've learned a lot about acceptance, and ultimately through John's cancer, like, you learn that in a really big way, and then that has a way of trickling down to other things. And I just don't think I'm as easily disappointed anymore. Not that I'm expecting the worst, but just like taking things more in stride, kind of learning to normalize struggles. And I think I shared this, I can't remember when I shared it, but it was an acrostic for acceptance. And the N was normalize struggles. And the last C was create a vision for a rich life that can coexist with difficulties. Like life right now can be full too. You can have a life that's whole and not contingent on like your circumstances getting better or changing. And so that's kind of where I am. And I know that sounds very cliche. Like I'm trying to live in the moment and be happy and expectant, live expectantly, more hopeful, like wanting to see what God might do, focused on possibilities instead of worst case scenario, like what we've been talking about in our new book that we're doing. And I'm a big planner, and I still think planning is biblical. Like Jesus talked about it, the Proverbs talk about it. Like we seek counsel, we take advice, we make preparation for the future. But I think planning and holding on to things loosely and letting go are like two sides of the same coin. You plan, but it's ultimately out of your control. And so I'm just grateful for that, because it makes all of life better and easier. And the ways that I've kind of been able to share that is I started an Instagram account, and this may seem a little strange, but it's specifically about like home decor projects, decorating, things which might seem a little on the surface. And I call it No Place Like Home 615. That's our area code. And I don't consider myself an influencer. I don't really want to be an influencer. I mainly started it as a way to like document my year at like a photo journal. And a lot of it's pictures of my house and maybe little things I'm doing, tweaking, redoing, flower arrangements. But it's just been a really good chance to communicate some things that God is teaching me. Like sometimes it's just a caption about the weather or the flowers or whatever I've done. But a lot of times if God has shown me something, I'll try to fit it in there as a life lesson around whatever is going on in my house. And it's just been a good way to be accountable, to kind of live what I say God is teaching me, living it out. And it's been a really neat way to meet a whole community of women from all over the United States that love the things that I love. And I don't know, we know each other by first name on a first name basis. And I even had people there praying for things. Like I've never mentioned John on that because that's not what I was trying to do. But I don't know. I would never, I'm not a blogger. I don't like writing that much, but I kind of like the short content format, like a blip of what God's teaching me and showing me. And I've already started to look back at those pictures, and I can remember where I was, what I was thinking, because it started, right after John's diagnosis. And it's been good to go back and look. It's kind of like keeping a journal, which I don't really do daily. So this has been my way to journal.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. And I think that looking back on that is really going to show a lot of things that you've learned, we may not even be cognizant of, like we all grow and change so much. And if we have a journal or photos or something we can look back on, it really calls that to mind.
Yeah. And I was a little hesitant when I first started, like, what will people think? Like, why is she living in denial? Why is she caring so much about her house? Like, it could seem superficial, but I'm not in denial of my situation. I am sad plenty of times, but I just find that creativity and like kind of making something beautiful is very cathartic for me. And it's relaxing. Like, I had a lady say, "Do you ever sit down?" And I said, "Well, not if I can help it." Like, it's not that I'm distracting myself and living in denial. I just, I've kind of always been that way. I've always liked to have a project going, but it's relaxing and cathartic for me to create things.
Yeah.
So that's where that comes from.
Yeah. That's awesome. Mindy, what have you learned about yourself, or what have you learned?
I have learned a couple of things, and it's wild, but I feel like a tree that I've seen things that have been lopped off over the past 4 years, and it was painful, and I'm thankful, and I'm glad it's done. So I've learned I'm not in control of pretty much anything. So I don't strive so hard for the things that I think should happen. That can be in any area or with my people. I've learned how to let go and also how to let new things in. I've had to surrender my idea of home many times. Home is something that means a lot to me, but it's not an actual place. And I've journaled about it a lot. I've picked up journaling over the past 4 years, and that has been imperative to the pain and to the healing that has happened. Surrender has been a big key term, in both with letting children go out of the nest, and also letting children get older and have their own opinions, and letting that happen and praying for them. I've learned that silence is restorative in my life. I've learned to be okay in silence. I crave it. Time is an ingredient, not just in cooking, but in life. Things sometimes just take time. Some of the wonderful things I've picked up, I have a top 3. I've started teaching fitness classes again, and this is one of those major parts of my life I thought was over 4 years ago when we started our podcast. I had just left my job in Tennessee, and I thought I was done. And I realized I'm not done. I love it. And I'm back to it. So I'm thankful to have that back into my life again. It truly is a passion. I've just picked up leading, teaching, and writing my own Bible study. I haven't really mentioned that on here, I don't think. And that's a new writing process, exploring process, something that I'm not even sure how else to describe it, but that's new in my life. And I think the major thing that I've learned over the past 4 years that has truly changed me is gratitude. Having gratitude. I call it gratitude for yesterday. Each morning when I sit down and I journal, I try to think about and look for the ways that God is moving, or something that my husband did or said that, that I'm thankful for, or something that's going on in one of my kids' lives. There's always things that I'm praying over, and there's still hard things that happen, but learning to look for the places that I'm grateful has truly changed my outlook on life. So,
yeah, there's definitely been a lot of inner work that all of us have had to do, because we've all had kids leaving, we've had job losses, moving, diagnoses. Like, there's so many things that can't help but change and mold us. And I think if listeners are listening, they can probably think back in their minds of different things. We'll get messages about, their kids are going off to school, or maybe their spouse has been diagnosed with something. And I do think that it's just amazing all the things that humans go through, even in just 4 short years. Like, if someone says, "What have you been up to lately?" I don't know, my mind immediately goes blank. But once someone starts talking, it's like, oh yeah, I've had that too. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh yeah. There's a lot that happens in 4 years. But we definitely want to talk about some of the highlights from our podcast. And what are some of the favorite highlights that you have of our podcast?
I think for me, like I've already mentioned, it's been listener engagement, just some of the responses we've gotten. I think we've said this before. It only takes one great response to say, okay, I can keep doing this, or I want to keep doing this, And like I said, it just was, I never expected that part of it. So thank you, listeners. And I think as far as my favorite actual podcast, I think I didn't go back to all 4 years because we've talked about those in the past, but from this year, I definitely think Happy School those were my favorite. So yeah, I really enjoyed the books we've done, and I'm enjoying this one too. What If It's Wonderful?
I totally agree, Julie. My favorite guest was Julie Gordon, the author of Happy School. My favorite episodes were, I had several, but I loved all of our Happy School episodes. Also, I also truly loved the being able to tell our story of moving to LaGrange, Love Where You Live. That was episode 191. That just personally meant a lot to me to be able to give that testimony. And then honestly, I do love our seasonal episodes because I feel like it gets me personally ready. The preparation for those episodes is so, so good for me because I don't like change and it forces me to get ready for something. I do have a favorite listener interaction. We met Susanna at our meet and greet here in LaGrange at my home. And she was so delightful. I love that woman. And she just made my whole year. I loved meeting her, and it came through this podcast. And I just was truly, truly blessed that she would drive to my home, bring her friend, and be such a bright light in all of our lives. Really, I mean, she's incredible.
I wish I could have met her.
I know.
She was really fun. Yeah. Thank you for coming to visit us. Yeah. I'm looking back over our titles for this year, and there are so many ones that I like. I mean, I like the lighthearted ones where we do the advice episodes, and I also like the deep ones, like one's called Deep Thoughts. I mean, I just feel like we have a lot of different ones. I mean, I do like our seasonal episodes. I enjoyed our boundaries episode. I don't know. I'd probably tend to enjoy most the episodes where we talk about like an emotion or thought that we have, and then we all share it. One thing I do think that is nice about our podcast, and we've said it privately to each other, but when we get listener thoughts or feedback, I often feel again glad that one of the kind of highlights of our podcast is that you, like, even when we did our COVID vaccine episode, people talk to me and they're like, oh, well, I couldn't even tell who was vaccinated and who wasn't. Like, we were able to talk about a subject without just like coming down on the other side and, tearing them to shreds. Like, I just like the fact that we can have sometimes difference of opinions or talk about hard topics, but we're not just so hard line about it. And I don't know.
Yeah, I think people know who we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I don't think we're hiding who we are.
No.
Yeah. And I think that is kind of a unique quality these days.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like, I feel like there are things that we can talk about and not just like hate each other at the end, or that even a listener that disagreed with us wouldn't feel like we hated them at the end, or I don't know. I appreciate that about what we've tried to do. I'm
actually kind of proud of that. Yeah.
Yes, I am too.
And, I thought about this, that at first I really loved having guests on, and that was a big goal to find guests. But now I think what I enjoy most is just talking with the two of you about life and hospitality and family and home life and serious, deep things and funny, lighthearted things. I do appreciate the balance. I think we balance each other out on the heaviness and lightness of the topic.
I agree. And then I totally agree with even having differences of opinion, amongst the three of us sometimes, which is really, really healthy. I mean, that's a relationship, right? And so I appreciate that we can have, differences of opinion, but that it doesn't have to separate us. And we can continue to have a friendship. and a podcast.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk about dreaming. And Mindy, you put, let's dream again. What do you hope to cover or accomplish in the future? And I don't know. I've said so many times on this podcast, questions like that make me freeze. I have no answer. But tell me what you guys are dreaming of, and I can like ride on your coattails. So who has a dream?
Julie, you want to go? You want to go?
Well, I just want to say I have no dreams right now. I have no plans except to keep doing what I'm doing until someone tells me otherwise. So it's up to you girls as far as the podcast. Like, I know in my nature to hold on to things too long and too tightly. And I'm not, I'm just saying I'm up for anything, like I know that things change and that's okay. And that used to would have scared me. Like back when I thought you two were maybe ready to quit, I was like, no, this has to go on, like I need this. And I don't think I feel that way anymore. Like I'm thrilled with it. I love doing this, but I just hold on to things more loosely now.
Right.
All right, well, Mindy, so you have to be the big dreamer for us. Okay. Dream big, Mindy.
The very first thing I thought about, we kind of touched on it earlier, was to maybe travel together and
that would be
kind
fun.
of, talk about that. Like talk about some different interactions with different cultures or people or places and, have some other experiences together, I thought would be really cool. So we've already done the meet and greet in LaGrange, and that was a big deal for us. And so I think that we need to try to do something like that again in Nashville.
Yeah.
After, I'm hoping you guys will do a Nashville episode and we can kind of talk about a bigger city and, some things like that. But also I think if I had a guest that I would love to interview, a dream guest, it would be Corey Robertson. She is the Duck Commander's wife. I follow her on Instagram. Totally love the wisdom that comes from her. And then the legacy of wisdom, like her mom is on there, and her mom, like what a legacy. Anyway, she has a podcast about grandparenting or something like that. I haven't listened to it yet, but it's on my list. And then her kids, like her kids that are following the Lord and raising their families. And it's like, you can see all of these generations, but Corey, in my mind, is somebody that I would love to kind of pick her brain about how do you love your mom well and, build into that relationship. And also you're a mom and you're a grandmother and you also have this following, and like, how does she do all of this stuff? So she fascinates me.
Okay. Reach out, Mindy.
Oh my goodness. If you know Corey Robertson personally, tell her we want to talk.
Is she Jace's wife or the other guys?
No, she's Willie's wife.
Oh, okay.
Right. So that's it. Those are my dreams.
Well, those are big dreams, Mindy. And going somewhere together would definitely be fun. And interviewing Corey Robertson, I'm up for that too. If anyone wants to reach out, Mindy, or you want to reach out or whatever, we'll see what we can do. I mean, she sounds like she's in the thick of midlife and would have some good advice to give for us. But yeah. All right, listeners, we hope that you've enjoyed this walk down memory lane like we have. I mean, it's fun to kind of look back and see where we've been. It kind of makes us, I think, more hopeful for the future. It's interesting to see how God has grown and changed each of us. It's humbling, I think, like when we think about the painful parts of the last 4 years, and it's humbling, like to see the ways that God works. And I'm so thankful that you guys speak truth and encouragement and good things into my life. And we hope that that's what we do for the listeners. We hope that when you listen to our podcast, that you are feeling uplifted and more hopeful and like you've learned something, because that really is our hearts every week. We always want to leave people feeling like it was worth their hour.
Yeah. And if you do feel that way, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
We always do love hearing from you.
Yeah. And if you want to reach out, you can always find us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast, or you can always email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. All right, Julie and Mindy, we're off to start our 5th year of podcasting. That seems pretty
happy
amazing.
Anniversary.
Yes.
Who
knows what's going to happen, but happy anniversary. All right.
Yes.
We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds great. Bye.
Right, bye. We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.